So everyone who's here, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, you are on the Amazon PPC webinar with Selix and Seller's Choice. We're going to try to go over everything we can touch on about automated campaigns as well as doing them manually yourself, and then obviously your automated and manual campaigns, which we'll touch on. If you have any questions, feel free to please comment them. I will try to get them as much as possible. Franz, just so you know, I'll be reading them and I'll let you know what kind of questions come up. There is a slight delay on the questions, so if you guys ask questions and we don't get to them right away, give us a little bit of time. We're definitely going to try to get to them as soon as we can. But we can go ahead and get started here. So why don't we introduce ourselves? So my name is Andrew Maffetone. I am the Director of Marketing and Operations here at Seller's Choice. I've been in e-commerce for a little over a decade now. I've been in Amazon almost the same amount of time. I've helped a lot of large sellers, a lot of small sellers. I've helped with a ton of different ones. And I believe I'm pretty qualified to be on this webinar. What about you, Franz? You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Franz. I'm founder and CEO of Selix. Selix is a software, an Amazon software to help you manage and grow your Amazon business. The idea is to combine everything, all the features into one software instead of using many different softwares. One of our main features obviously is PPC and PPC automation. And so I've been focusing a lot about PPC in the past 2.5 years. I'm speaking at some events like the Prosper Show most recently, and in general I just love to talk everything about Amazon. So I feel like I talk like 100 hours a week about Amazon. So I'm very passionate about everything that's related to Amazon.
Yeah, and I saw your talk at Prosper. It was great. It's nice to have a nice high level talk on PPC. So as I mentioned for everyone, we'll have Q&A at the end. I will also probably be pulling some questions throughout the webinar so we can make sure we stay within that category as best we can. And then of course, to make sure you guys stick around, we each have our own little giveaway that we'll be doing. Ton of extra stuff for you guys to make sure that this webinar is fully worth it for you. And we will try to touch on every question we possibly can at the end without taking up too much of everyone's time. But so we can get started here. So if you're on this webinar, there's almost a good chance that you're using Amazon PPC right now, whether you're in Seller Central or in AMS. We get a lot of complaints about ACOS staying under control, or if you are a reseller, or even if you're a private label seller and you just have thousands of products, and managing those campaigns can sometimes be a pain. Competitor issues, and then of course you're probably just really good looking. That's definitely pretty accurate there. So let's see what we got. So let's get started here. All right. So we want to keep this webinar as extremely high level as we possibly can. We really don't want to spend a lot of time going over the basics. So this is basically our only slide. Everyone, hopefully what ACOS is, the basics on how to optimize your campaigns. If you don't know, these are your 3 basic ads through Amazon. So you have your sponsored products that show up right below the headline ad, which is the next one over in your search. And then you have your product display ads that show up underneath the buy box. So we're going to try and touch on all these, and we're going to touch on how to optimize them manually, as well as how to optimize them by automating it. So we will start with sponsored products, which Franz, I believe you would agree, is probably the most utilized, correct?
Yeah, so I'm having some connection issues, so I'll change Wi-Fi in a second. But yeah, so I think sponsored products are obviously the most used ads. And when we see the distribution in budget, I'd say that almost all sellers, I'd say 98% of all Selix users use sponsored products. And it's a lot lower for headline search ads. So I'd say it's probably something like 15% or so that use headline search ads. And then for product display ads, I mean, it's hard to say. Product display ads are obviously, only for vendors. So we do have a few vendors on our vendor edition using it, but typically we see a very strong focus on sponsored products, and now gradually an increase in headline search ads as well.
Yeah. Just like any other marketer, I love to test as much as I can. And we always suggest to start with sponsored product ads, mainly because, like when we'll go through here on how to, prep things and how you can use automated ads and all that stuff, which we'll get into. I like to basically use sponsored products to start to test which specific keywords are going to work best on headline ads, and then start my headline ads with that information. So that way I'm not starting sponsored product ads and headline ads all at the same time and just getting an amalgamation of random data that I have to try and, decipher which one's working best.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the big problem with headline search is just in the reporting. You really have very limited reporting capabilities. I mean, essentially what you get is this brand revenue, which is a very broad number. You have no idea which products really get sold. So I think in terms of performance measurement, sponsored products are a lot better than headline search ads.
Yeah. So structure, so I know this is going to be an incredibly opinionated webinar. I think we're going to have people who agree with some things and some people who disagree. Franz and I here are going to try and touch on what we have seen work. So this is how I always have our team structuring our clients here at Seller's Choice. So I always have a manual campaign with a bunch of manual ad groups in it, and then a complementary auto campaign with those same exact ad groups replicated throughout the auto campaign. So every manual campaign has a complementary auto campaign. And one thing that always throws everyone off and no one seems to understand is I always like to have one campaign that is in all products, every product thrown into just one ad group, and it's everything in one. And I always get so much crap for this one. And so I consider it like a safety net. So to give you all an example, the way we'll usually approach things is with a manual, like let's say a manual keyword, I'm going to bid around $1, we'll say. My automated ad group that is complementary to that manual campaign or manual ad group, I'm going to probably put that bid around 50 cents to start with. So that's my starting bid. I'm then going to take this all products campaign. I'm going to throw every product in there, and I'm going to put that bid at like 20 cents. Something ridiculous where one sale will just make my cost look great. Most of the time, this is actually a very well converting ad group for us. And the reason that this kind of comes out and works out so well is because when you start to bid at certain levels, you're starting to show for certain keywords, especially at an automated level. I want to show for some of that really random stuff that maybe you wouldn't expect, but I don't want to pay a lot for it because most of the time they're not going to convert as well. So if you consider having that one all products campaign as just that safety net, you'll actually see a nice increase. Plus, our little backup plan is for those sellers who have a huge product line. You have thousands of products, and sometimes it's a little difficult to make sure certain products are being placed. It's really easy to just select all, make sure every product is being advertised, so at least you have that running while you dig in and start to add it into other ad groups. Franz, you've probably seen more campaigns than I have, and I would love to know what your approach usually is.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same approach. So essentially the idea that we follow and generally what we see working is trying to combine the advantages of auto and manual campaigns and the advantages of the different match types. So a question that I get asked a lot is, what's the best match type, or, what campaign type is the best? And the answer is there is no best match type. It's just, each match type has its pros and its cons, right? So the pro of an exact match type is that you don't have any, any search terms that you don't want to have in this campaign. So it's very narrow. The disadvantage obviously is you might be missing out on some search terms. On the broad side, the advantage is that you have all those search terms. The disadvantage is that obviously there will also be some search terms that are not relevant to your product. So the structure that we suggest in general at Selix is obviously one auto campaign, then one manual campaign, and within the manual campaign we suggest two ad groups, one for broad keywords and one for exact keywords. So this is something I wasn't sure if I if I got this correctly, you said you have a manual ad group as well. But so which match types do you use?
So I actually combine the two match types. And usually the reason so we have a very large spreadsheet approach, which basically Celix can more or less automate in certain aspects. But when we do the spreadsheet approach, we really utilize filters and being able to structure the spreadsheet. So having them in different ad groups doesn't really seem too necessary, in the fact that you can kind of see if your one keyword that's broad match and your one keyword that's exact match, have them right next to each other so you can see which one is working. Because we always leave that broad match on, but we just start to lower that bid and start to raise that exact match. So we like to have them in one ad group. I have seen a lot where they get split up. Personally, I'm actually not a fan of phrase, so we don't even really use much of that, if ever. But we really see them as just being totally fine within the same ad group and being able to track them next to each other.
Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. And if you look at them in Excel, so about phrase, we have a similar take on this. So we did some analysis on the different match types, and we found that the difference between broad and phrase is actually very insignificant. So we'd rather go with broad, so that you really have the very wide net essentially, instead of phrase, which is a little bit stuck in between, between the advantage of exact and the advantages of broad, right? So the reason, or let's say the problem that I see if you combine them, or actually, I mean, that's a question how you handle it. So if you combine both in one ad group, right, and you look at them, so when you look at the results, do you look on a keyword level or on a search term level? Because if you look on a keyword level, then obviously you will have the problem that I see is, so you have the same keyword on an exact as a keyword, and then within that broad keyword you will have it as a search term amongst other search terms as well, right? So for the exact same search term, it might be difficult to really get the full picture. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so we typically look at them, we look at both, basically. So we're looking at a search term level as well as the key term level, the keyword level. And basically, by being able to compare the two side to side kind of helps in a structural aspect. But I can see what you mean, and having them separated into different ad groups can help in terms of when you're basically just looking at a campaign to see which one's working. But on a search term, I also see what you mean, how you need to see which keyword is working, but that's kind of where the exact match and certain bidding strategies kind of tweak that.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about sponsored products is that you have a ton of different options how you can structure them, right?
Exactly. And again, like I'd said, and I'm sure we're going to say this 5 more times, like it's an incredibly opinionated what works and what doesn't. There's nothing out there that is like from Amazon that says this is what we do. So it's really just ongoing testing. So
maybe as a final question, how do you handle very large selections with multiple child products? So I'm thinking of apparel, a T-shirt in 20 different sizes, 5 different colors. How do you handle this?
So we add them all into the same ad group. However, as certain products start to stand out and certain products start to stand out because they're failing, then we separate them out into their own ad group. So if I have, I have my Steelers cup here. So let's say I have a Steelers T-shirts and I have 15 different colors and a bunch of different sizes. I'm gonna put them all in one ad group because they're all relatively the same thing, and people are gonna want to search for their size. But if I see that one size is working, I may separate it out and start to do keywords like medium does really well or something like that.
Okay. So you gradually try to narrow. Okay. That makes sense.
Yep. Let's check it out. So, sorry, we didn't even touch on this one. So budget. So our suggestion on budget, and I got this question today. I've gotten this question probably 10 times this week. I've probably had this question a million times in the past. Where do I spend? What should if I'm starting an account, what should my monthly budget be? How can I get my budget to X? Like, there's so many questions on this. So the way we always suggest this one is because depending on how you structure your campaigns and depending on how many ad groups you have in there, we always suggest to start your budget very high. but keep your bids very, very low and only slowly, incrementally raise those bids so that your ads have the opportunity to run all day, but you're not spending that much. So if you put a campaign for $500 a day, that may be astronomically high for you. But if your bid's at 20 cents, you're only going to spend like $10 a day, depending on how many ad groups are in there. So that, again, Franz, I'd love to hear your rebuttal on that. But our belief is basically allowing the ads to show all day, or you're just not going to get enough accurate data on what's working and what's not.
Yeah, so I would definitely agree for new products where you're testing out a lot and you're not sure how much you can actually spend, right? And how big the market really is. Mm-hmm. In general, our take on the budget is that the budget, you should never reach the budget, right? So you should never hit the budget cap. Exactly. For essentially a simple reason. So if you have a profitable campaign, right, why should you stop running profitable campaigns, at 3 PM if you could generate additional profitable sales a lot longer, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have profitable campaigns, you don't want to stop those campaigns. If you do have unprofitable campaigns, then again, you don't want to spend your entire budget on unprofitable campaigns. You want to either, turn them off or make them profitable, or, you want to change something without spending the entire budget. So we really see the budget as a kind of an airbag. So, for, typical examples, so instead of typing 50 cents, you bid $50, right? So, a fat finger kind of mistake. You have competitors clicking on your ads to try to steal your bank, essentially. So, those are the situations where we see the budget kind of being a safety net, an airbag for, let's say, unusual situations. But in the normal course of action, we believe that, if you have profitable campaigns, you never want to hit the budget. If you have unprofitable campaigns, also you want to change it as fast as possible without spending the entire budget.
Correct. Yeah, I would agree with. I think the 500 was a little bit of an exaggeration, but I do agree that keeping it within what you're usually doing, yes, obviously makes sense. But okay, we're on the same page.
No, I agree.
So bidding, another fun question. I know we get this question all the time. Lowering your bid does not necessarily mean it's going to lower your ACOS, and raising your bid doesn't necessarily mean you're going to bring in more sales. Depending on that keyword, I think the whole the mantra of marketing, the word is just, it depends. Like, it depends. It depends on the keyword. It depends on what your bid was originally at. It depends on what your ACOS is at. Raising a bid is only going to start to show you, if it's a broad match, it's going to start to show you more and more for other variations of that keyword. But that doesn't mean you're going to start getting more sales. It just means you're going to start showing for more random keywords that you didn't select in the first place. And then lowering your bid, yes, you're bidding less on certain keywords, but now if you're hitting that perfect spot, but you lower that bid, you're now basically getting taken away from those keywords that you were doing okay with in the first place. Thoughts?
I mean, it's always a bit controversial saying these kind of things, but actually it makes a lot of sense. So I think the key metric essentially that decides on how much you can bid is the conversion rate, right? Mm-hmm. So this is really the central metric that determines how much you can spend, right? So if you have a 20% conversion rate, that means on average you need 5 clicks to generate a sale, right? That's what 5% conversion rate means. Now, if you know that you can spend $10 for each sale, and you know that you can that you need 5 clicks for a sale, then essentially that means you can spend $2 on a click, right? Now, if let's say you have a conversion rate of 10%, that means you need 10 clicks, and you can only spend $1 per click. If again you have $10 to spend, right? So the conversion rate is really the key driver, and the bid. Just lowering the bid, exactly like you said, is really not might not necessarily drive down your ACOS, right? That's for sure.
Yeah. Perfect. So maintenance, ongoing optimization. So we do a few different things here. So we track each individual ASIN to see how it's performing. Basically, for the conversion, first of all, if you know what that certain ASIN is converting for, then you know exactly what you should be bidding. So if that, like you'd mentioned, if that ASIN has about a 5% conversion rate, so you should know exactly what your max keyword bid should be. However, if it's low or if it's high, it's going to decipher if you can lower or higher your bids on average from what you're at currently. We optimize every week. So I know this is something we kind of touched on if we were going to talk about this or not. So the way we do it, let's say on Wednesdays, so today my team is optimizing for last week. And the reason being is that 48 to 72 hour delay that Amazon has, negating their click attribution with the whole add to cart thing. But with that delay, we always like to optimize weekly. And the main reason being, A, there's that delay, so you want to have a few days past. And then B, you really don't know. Like, I have some sellers who do really, really well on Mondays and don't do well on Fridays. So I don't want to optimize for Monday and then mess up my Friday and vice versa. So if I have a full week, that at least tells me on average what my week looks like. Now, it doesn't really take into account if there's a holiday, so it was a slow day or it was a busy day, depending on the holiday. But getting at least that week of data really seems to at least keep things stagnant. Agreed? Disagree?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the attribution on Amazon side is 7 days, right? By default. So we looked into the data. We found that for most campaigns is actually you probably get 85 to 90% of sales within the first 3 days. So I would totally agree that 3 days is probably the right amount to wait, because it's not as long as 7 days, but still long enough to get to capture the majority of the sales. But so waiting for at least 3 days, I think, is really paramount, right? Because other than this, you always think your performance is terrible, right? The ACOS always looks terrible for today. And it only improves over the next couple of days, right? I think that if you're running or if you're managing your campaigns manually, I think having this routine of getting in every Wednesday and looking at the prior week or so, having a fixed schedule definitely makes a lot of sense. I think from an automation perspective, obviously what we strive at is to essentially manage them on a daily basis, right? Mm-hmm. Because obviously, as a software, it's a lot easier to handle this than if you do it manually. I think if I were to do it manually, I wouldn't do it on a daily basis. It would be too much. And I would probably have the same schedule that you just mentioned, right? So once or twice a week, waiting for 3 days prior to or for the prior week.
Yeah. So so we're going to get into headline ads now. But let's go through. We got a ton of questions, so we're going to try and hit as many as we can real quick. Let's see what we got.
Andrew, let me just get another internet connection, because I'm having some sound issues here. I'll be back in a second. Okay.
Yeah, sure. All right, so Fran's going to work on tweaking his Wi-Fi, so I'm going to try and knock out some of these questions you guys have. So let's see. Barbara asked, once you have a strong manual ad, do you discontinue the automatic ad? And no, I don't. Typically what I'll do is I'll get that bid significantly lower. That automatic campaign, I'll bring it down, but I never want to get rid of it, because you never know if it's going to start teaching you something, new search terms, new keywords that you should be adding, anything like that. It can't hurt to have it running at an extremely low bid. So I would say just incrementally lower it and then give it another try. Let's see what we got. Why won't you create a phrase match manual campaign? I have 3: broad, phrase, exact. So I don't like all 3. I don't like phrase, mainly because if you're doing long tail keywords well enough and you're, not having these small keywords like shirt or cup, then phrase really isn't going to help you too much. I like to have them all in one campaign. Franz mentioned he likes to split them up, so it's a little bit of a different approach. But to me, phrase, which actually comes into next, Jane Smith's question about why don't you like phrase. So to me, phrase, I don't see enough difference, and I don't see a lot of results from it. When we do phrase, I always have better broad match terms, and then obviously our exact match terms do better than that. And when I have phrase, it really tends to limit the amount that it can show for, and it's not getting me up the algorithm any higher than I need it to. So I'd rather have the broad match and have a better chance at showing for more keywords. Come back on, Franz?
Yes, I'm back.
Good?
Perfect now, a lot better.
There you go. Cool. So let's see. Question to Franz. When I used your strategy, broad and exact ad group in one campaign, I usually have troubles that the budget is mostly used for only one ad group and I can't get enough results from the other campaign. How do you handle with the situation when you want to divide the amounts? Separate campaign?
Yeah, so essentially what you do want to have is so basically the recommendation that we give is to start with the same bid for the broad ad group and for the exact ad group, right? And so then what you see is that or the ideal scenario would be that you get all the traffic for the exact keywords that you're bidding on in your exact keyword and your exact ad group, and you only get the traffic for the other search terms that you're not bidding on exactly in your broad ad group. So typically what you see is a rather higher concentration in the exact ad group, whereas the broad ad group, but this is not necessarily a bad sign. So I wouldn't say that your goal should be to have an equal spend on both ad groups. I think that it's rather typical to see that the spend is higher in the exact ad group because those are those big fat head keywords that you have for your product. Whereas the broad ones are rather the search terms that you're not bidding on exactly. And this leads to typically a lower ad spend. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem, and I don't think it should be a goal to have a 50-50 split on the budget between those two ad groups.
Okay. So we'll come back to the rest of the questions. We'll keep going here a little bit because I know we're already moving along. So headline ads. So you have to have at least 3 products. You guys know hopefully how the headline ads work. So we'll touch on this. So I'm actually a big fan now of setting up these Amazon stores and pushing my headline ads to the store as opposed to letting Amazon create the landing page. So if you're in Seller Central and you've created this landing page before, you know what I'm talking about where where'd Franz go? Franz. So hopefully he'll be back. So setting up the landing page, you select your handful of products, and then Amazon creates like that search term page where it's just, or that regular search page where it's just the 3 products or however many products you picked. If you create this storefront, this custom storefront, where essentially you have categories. So here, we selected this iPhone 4, 4S cases. I can run an ad directly to this URL. And if you'll see down here at the bottom, you can actually add the custom URL here. So you can actually run the ads to a more branded and a lot better looking area. So if you have access to AMS, this is a great way to do that. Unfortunately, from what we've seen, at least as of today, or at least as of since this webinar started, there is still no option to have that custom URL in Seller Central. So it's AMS as of right now. Hopefully that'll get freed up soon. But we see that as a great branding opportunity as opposed to just that stagnant regular landing page that Amazon creates.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think for headline search, it's actually quite interesting. Do you, when you look at the budget, right? So how much money you spend on AMS, do you have different budgets that you plan for sponsored products and headline searches and product display? I mean, do you have a fixed budget in mind that you say, headline search is branding and sponsored products is performance marketing, or is it just, the overall AMS budget that you consider?
It kind of depends. In most cases, we're doing sponsored products on Seller Central while doing headline ads in AMS, so it allows us to pretty easily see that budget. Otherwise, we still just kind of take it as it is, where we do a combination of the metrics, but we also break them out to see how each campaign's doing, how the headlines are doing versus how the sponsored products are doing. So that way we can kind of see a little bit of that. I know there is that whole branding like the way that they count the conversions with headline ads is obviously different from the sponsored products. But if you are really trying to build a brand on Amazon or off Amazon for that case, we really do see it as you got that sale. So it is beneficial. It's just with headline ads, you want to take them with a little bit of a grain of salt before you get so excited about your ACOS.
Your fantastic ACOS.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one I wanted to touch on this just because I've had a lot of sellers and a lot of headline ads that if they were your headline ads, I'm sorry, but I clicked on them. And I see these landing pages where, like in this case, we picked 3 relevant items, but I see these sellers who are maybe resellers or they, they're private label sellers, but they have a bunch of random products that don't really go together. And they just make one headline ad where they just throw a bunch of random products in there. You really need to have that copy that you put right at the top there, right here. Where's my mouse? Right there. It really needs to say exactly what you're about to be shown. Really, because if you just say like, here is our brand's products and no one knows what your brand is yet, you're really pushing them to a landing page that just doesn't have the products that they may be looking for. So you're going to be looking at a really high ACOS of just no sales from people just going in and looking at a random mix of the products that you put in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah,
nothing to add here.
You would think that one's obvious. So this one with optimizing and with adding keywords and all that kind of stuff, it's really the same. We have the same approach we do for sponsored products. Thankfully, I think I always feel like it was like 2 or 3 months ago, but I feel like it was a lot longer than that now, where AMS finally released, some more reporting that we got a while back. Now you have it in Seller Central where you can actually pull the keyword report and see how headline ads are doing, and be able to kind of clean them up a little bit. So to us, it's the same approach. I don't know, Franz, do you have a different approach on how you optimize your headline ads?
I think that since it's hard to track the performance in headline ads, it's I think so. Generally, we see that it takes less effort to optimize because you just have less possibilities to really track what's going on. So I think that's really, I understand that Amazon considers headline searches as a branding ad type. I don't agree with this. I don't see why headline searches, which is at the top, should be branding, and right below where you have sponsored products, this is performance marketing. I just don't follow this logic. But this is the logic that I have. So it's just very hard to analyze the performance, and when it's hard or essentially impossible to really track the performance, it just makes it more complicated also to really have a consistent optimization strategy. So I'd say yes, basically the same idea as for sponsored products, but with less overall, because it's less manageable just.
Yeah. And basically what we do is we let the sponsored product ads we're running teach us which keywords we should be adding into the headline ads. So you get a little extra data there, but I agree that the branding approach doesn't really help too much. Which I just touched on. So one of the things that we like to do as well when you're pulling that search term report, go into your listing and make sure that those search terms are like prevalent. Make sure that, they're in the title or they're in the images or in the bullet points. We always see these sellers that are optimizing their PPC campaigns, but they have all this data and they're not doing anything with it. They're not going to their listings and making sure that these keywords are prevalent. You might be getting a lot of clicks on something that you think you should be converting for and you're not. And the reason might be because that keyword isn't prevalent enough in your listing. So my suggestion would always be to take that data that you're getting from PPC and go edit it in your listing. Absolutely,
right. So this is probably the prime strategy. I know there are some strategies out there that say that's the only goal of sponsored products, right? So to just find out those search terms and then optimize your listing based on this. I wouldn't agree with this. So I think that it's a performance marketing channel and it needs to perform. And it's not a keyword research tool, right? So you can add this as kind of like an additional outcome, but this to me is not the prime reason for using sponsored products.
Yeah. So let's go into product display ads. I'm not a fan. I'll say that right off the bat. They're really difficult. They're really difficult to deal with. Optimizing them, you really don't have too much to work with. For those of you who don't have access to AMS, I'll try not to touch on these too long. But essentially, you can select your own ASIN, and then you can select competitor ASINs, or you can select an interest. 9 times out of 10, we're going to select competitors' ASINs. So if I'm selling, my Steelers cup, I'm going to run this ad on other Steelers cups out there and try to steal the sale. That's really the only best approach we've seen. Obviously, you can do complementary products. So I have my Steelers cup. Maybe I want to run it on Steelers koozies or something like that. But really, those are the best approaches we have. We do these when we know we can beat out a competitor. Otherwise, we try not to touch them too much, just because we've seen success with them, but sometimes it's few and far between. You may be really successful with one ASIN and really not successful with another, and then they just kind of break even, and why'd you even bother? Plus, I'm kind of guessing that they're gonna get rid of them. I'm not really sure. I don't know if you think that or not. I know they're putting more work into AMS, but it's still not available on Seller Central. So my theory is they might get rid of these one day, but we'll see what happens there. All right, so we'll touch on how we're doing this manually, and then we're going to let Franz show us how we do it automated. So obviously, if you haven't been able to tell yet, we're big fans of the manual approach. So what we'll do is we actually pull the search term report, the keyword, or the reports each week, and we'll look at how each keyword's doing week over week. Mainly because what you can do is, especially if you're doing this manually, let's say one week you have a keyword where it's got 1 or 2 clicks, you've spent like $2 or $3, and you're like, all right, I'm going to raise this up a little bit. Let's see if I can get this keyword moving. Next week, you're at like 4 or 5 clicks. You're like, all right, it's still okay. Let's raise it enough. And then the next week, you're at like 15, 20 bucks, and you spent too much. You're like, all right, so now I want to lower it. And you keep fighting with this keyword week over week. You never look to see how this keyword's done over the lifetime or how it's done over the past month to see if maybe you've spent $100 or $200 fighting with this keyword that you thought was going to make you money. So that's why we always look at these week over week. We always add the keywords when you're pulling your search term report. We do a monthly audit to kind of make sure that we're pausing correct keywords. We're adding to the search term report. This really allows us to kind of track seasonality for things. And really kind of look at, there's sometimes the reason I think the manual approach works is because you have the seasonality of products. Sometimes you want to sell through a product and not others. Sometimes you want to be less profitable on certain ASINs than you do because you have a new product and you want your BSR to go up. There's a bunch of different reasons, and obviously there'll be kind of opinions here, but this is essentially how we manipulate these spreadsheets to see how these campaigns overall are doing. So this is just a screenshot of pretty much how we start to manipulate all the reports that we're getting week over week. So Franz, I will let you take the other side of this and give us the automated.
Obviously, it's a lot better to automate everything, right?
Yeah.
No. I think what you say is very true. So I think there's merit for both things. So obviously, I mean, the advantage of automation, and so is that if you look at sponsored products, really, it means that essentially when you break it down, it's a constant repetition of the same steps, right? So essentially you're adjusting bids, right? So you have profitable keywords, so you want to increase bids to see if you can get more out of it. You have unprofitable keywords where you want to decrease the bids, right? You have keywords with no impressions. You want to increase the bid to see if you can get more impressions, right? So essentially on the bid side, I mean, there are 2 things you can do. You can either increase it or decrease it, right? And then for the keywords, essentially it's also the same thing, right? So you either pause a keyword or you set it negative if it's not working, and you add new keywords to try new keywords. So, I understand that for many sellers, it looks like a very complex operation, and I agree that in the Amazon space, it is probably the most complex aspect of selling on Amazon. But if you break it down, essentially, it is not as crazy or as difficult. It's not a rocket science as it might seem, right? Because essentially, it's just a repetition of the same steps. And so, if you agree that it is a repetition of the same steps, then if you go to the next slide, please. it really, you can essentially break it down to kind of like an if then, if this then that kind of relationship, right? So it's like an algorithm. So you have a certain condition that needs to be met within a certain time frame, and if this condition is met within the time frame, then you have a certain action that you want to take, right? So if you can go to the next slide. Essentially, we have one example for an auto campaign, right? You want to set the search terms to negative that don't generate any sales, right? I think that this is, I'm pretty sure you're doing something similar manually on a weekly basis, probably, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. So, essentially the condition would be if you have 0 sales, the time frame would be after 25 clicks. And we can talk about, what is an appropriate time frame. So if you have 0 sales after 25 clicks, then, you should just set your search term to negative. So this would then be the action, right? So another example would be on a manual campaign. You want to reduce the bid for an unprofitable keyword. So if you have an ACOS that is above 25%, so let's assume you're aiming for 25% ACOS, you see that you have an ACOS that is above 25% after 25 clicks, then essentially the action is that you want to reduce your bid to see if you can get profitable there, right?
Yeah.
So that's, some very, I think, straightforward stuff. Now, the main question is, how do you set the right limits, right? So that's the question, what's the right ACOS? What's the right bid? What's the right time to wait? By how much should you adjust the bids? So let's just look into those different parts. So the first question obviously is on the condition side, what's the right ACOS? What ACOS limits should I use in my PPC campaigns? And this is not just a question if you run it, if you automate your PPC campaigns, this is just as valid if you do it manually, right? So there are different ACOS limits that you should have in mind, which we'll see on the next slide. Andrew, if you could just go there. So essentially, if we break it down from the on the product side, so let's just assume we have a product, we have a certain we have FBA fees, we have Amazon fees, we have unit costs, and we have shipping costs, right? Or overhead costs. Essentially, at the end, you will have a profit margin for this product. In this case, it's just an example, 20%, right? So you have a 20% profit margin before sponsor products, so before any AMS spend. And this is important, right? So this is before any marketing spend. So if you have a 20% profit margin, you know that your break-even ACOS will be 20%, because your break-even ACOS is essentially your profit margin before PPC spend. So that means if you have a 20% margin and you spend 20% of your sales price on marketing, obviously your net profit will be 0. I think this is obvious. So the question that you need to decide as a seller is, how much net margin are you aiming for after PPC, right? So after deducting all the ad spend, so in this case, we just assume we want to keep a 5% net margin after PPC spend. That leaves you with a target ACOS of 15%, okay? So if you have 20% in margin, you want to keep 5% of this 20% after ad spend. That means you can invest 15% of your sales price into advertising, and this essentially is then your target ACOS, right? Yeah. So it's sometimes people just ask me, so what's a good target ACOS? And it really depends on your margin that you have before ad spend and the margin that you want to keep after ad spend. So there's no valid answer to this, no global answer to this, right?
Yeah. So
that's for the condition. For the time frame, and I think that this is the most interesting question, to be very honest. So the question is, how long should you wait before you adjust any keywords or any bids, right? And so the kind of the first guess would be that a time frame is measured in time, so something like days or weeks or something, right? But we believe that the best way to measure the time frame essentially is in clicks. And so if you could go to the next slide, the idea behind being that you wanna wait for the number of clicks, or you should wait a certain number of clicks, which is the expected number of clicks that it takes to generate a sale. So we talked about this before. If you have a conversion rate of 5%, that means that every 20 clicks on average, again, should lead to one sale. So that means if on average you need 20 clicks to generate one sale, why should you already pause a keyword after 5 clicks or so, right? That would be, I always say this would be unfair to the product or to the keyword, because the keyword and the product, they need 20 clicks on average. So if you pause the keyword after 5 clicks already, then this keyword didn't have the chance to really prove its worth, right? So we, in general, we suggest that you wait 100 divided by the conversion rate, and this in numbers of clicks then, right? So if you have a 5% conversion rate, it's 100 divided by 5, which is 20. And then you would wait 20 clicks, because this is the number that you would need on average to generate a sale. And if then the keyword doesn't perform and does not generate a sale within 20 clicks, then you can start lowering your bid afterwards, because obviously the conversion rate is not as good as you expected in the beginning, right?
Right.
And then finally for the action, so by how much should I adjust the bids? So the rule of thumb that we give here is just like 30%. And the reason for this is fairly simple. If you choose a lower number, let's say you choose to adjust it by 10%, it just takes a long time until you get into significant, areas. So if you start at 30 cents, for instance, and you increase it by 10%, that means you go from 30 to 33. And then you go from 33 to 37, and then from 37 to 40, 41 or so, right? So it just takes many iterations. It just takes a lot of clicks to really, get to a different level to a different bidding level, which is why we suggest to take 30%. On the other side, if you take a very high number, so let's assume that you would double your bids all the time. So you go from 30 cents to 60 cents. Then the chances are very high that you actually jump over the right bid that you're aiming for, and you're always going back and forth between some very extremes, and you're not in the middle, right? So 30% adjustment seems about right. At least, that's the rule of thumb that we give. So now some best practice. I just collected a few rules, and this is what we suggest to our users in Selix. If you could go on the next slides, then we have 4 different rules, right? So essentially what you can do in Selix obviously is you can replicate those rules, and then the software will automatically manage your campaigns following those rules that you've set yourself, right? And so the recommendation that we give in general is to just combine those 4 different rules, because those rules would really, it's definitely not as sophisticated as when Andrew and his team is managing it. But for sellers that just want to reduce the amount of time that they manage their campaigns and still want to get a good output, it's probably not the best output that you can, that you will get if you spend, 100 hours a week to manage your campaigns. It will, for many sellers, lead to very good results already. And so the combination is obviously, if your ACOS is low after one sale, then you want to increase your bid to see if you can actually get more traffic on this keyword. If the ACOS is high, right, so let's say above 25% after 20 clicks, then you want to decrease your bid. Obviously, so if you're above your target ACOS, you want to decrease your bid. And then finally, if you have 0 sales after 50 clicks, then you want to pause the keyword. And if you have, few impressions, so if you have less than 100 impressions after 7 days, again, you want to increase your bid, because you want to test if you can actually get more traffic on this keyword, right?
Right.
So those 4 rules, if they work together, they will keep your ACOS, they will keep your bids around a certain target ACOS. So in this case, the target ACOS is 25%. Obviously, you should calculate your own target ACOS. This is why it says adjust for your own product. And same obviously counts for the number of clicks. So also the number of clicks that you should wait depends on the conversion rate of your product. So those 20 and 50 clicks are just some best case scenarios that work for many sellers, but in an ideal world, you would calculate your own click thresholds, depending on your product. And then, so then you set up those things and in Celix, and then Celix will take care of this every day. We will check your campaigns and adjust the campaigns based on the rules that I just showed.
Beautiful. All right, so that just about wraps up everything. Now we're going to start plowing through some questions here. So please start to send us your questions. I'm going to get through as many as I can. Obviously, even if you don't have a question, I would love to know if you're ready to take on your Amazon PPC, if you learned enough, if you're going to take any of the approaches that we spoke about today, or if you think it's all BS and you're not going to do any of it. We'd love to hear that too.
That would be unfortunate.
That would be unfortunate, but hey, you know what? Sometimes it happens.
1 hour of BS.
So all right. So I got a bunch of stuff we're going to be giving away. Listing optimization is obviously a very big thing. It obviously has a lot to do with your PPC. Obviously your keywords and everything like that helps with your indexing, helps with your automated keywords, your broad match, all that fun stuff. So we have our own listing optimization ebook. It is not gated. There's nothing you got to do. All you got to do is go to that link and it will download. It's a bit.ly, so bit.ly/listing ebook, and it's all yours. Have it. If you don't download it, I'm going to send it out in an email anyway, so whatever you want to do. So we're also going to be giving away a handful of 30-minute PPC consultations. I'll go through your PPC as much as I can, and we'll look through everything and see what we can do to help you out with where your cost is at. I'm not selling you anything, I promise. I'm just going to be there to help. And then we're going to give away a PPC audit as well. So this is something we do in-house that's usually a pretty decent-sized project for us here, where essentially we go through and we're going to pull all the data that we can over the past 60 to 90 days, depending on which report we're pulling. And we're going to show you exactly how your keywords have been doing, which keyword you should pause, which ones you should add, how you should structure your campaign. We're going to send you an entire report on what you're currently doing versus what we believe you should be doing. So that's sellerschoice.agency/giveaway. It's gated, so the password is Amazon PPC. I did look at that page a little earlier, and I do apologize. It's not available on mobile right now, which I know killed me for being a marketer and having something that's not mobile friendly, but we just created it, so please bear with me. And all right, so
you're very generous here.
I try. I like to give stuff away. What can I say? So we have a ton of questions. You want me to start? Let's start going through these. So let's see what the first one we got. Do you collect keyword? Oh, they're still coming in. Do you collect keywords? This is from Sam. Do you collect keywords from auto and add them to manual and add them as a negative in auto? Amazon emailed me saying I shouldn't have two campaigns for the same ASIN. They suggested I should do either auto or manual, but not both. I'm confused. Franz, you want to take that one? Or you want me to?
I'm surprised that Amazon is sending out this email because I've heard many people at Amazon that saying the exact opposite. So with the first thing you said is what we would recommend. So run both. And so when you take it out of the auto campaign and you add it into a manual campaign, what we suggest is typically to put it in as negative phrase in the auto campaign so that you don't have the redundancy. So that essentially you take it out of the auto campaign, it's in the manual campaign, it's not showing up in the auto campaign anymore. Makes it a lot easier in the on the analytical side. So if you want to track performance, it makes it a lot easier if you don't have, the same keyword in two different ad groups.
Yeah. We actually have had a handful of sellers who have gone through, it's got a name and I can't remember it, but it's basically like Amazon running your campaign for you. And from what I've learned, just like Google, if you've ever had AdWords run for you from Google, they don't know what they're talking about, which shocks me. But every time we've had a seller do this, the seller obviously wants to give it a try and it makes total sense, but we've made the mistake many times where Amazon actually suggests a lot of crazy keywords and a lot of really high bidding and a lot of weird structure. And every time we just let them do it for a month or two, it went down. So if Amazon is telling you that you shouldn't have the two campaigns running at the same ASIN and it's a manual versus an auto, they're wrong. And another reason would be the auto campaigns. You'll actually show up in that similar sponsored products area in certain listings, whereas on a manual campaign, you don't show up in those listings for that. So if you turn that off, you're not going to show up there. So let's see, I got another one coming through. Is it okay to run an unprofitable campaign for a new product with a means to start ranking organically for a certain search term? You want to start there?
Yeah, I mean, so there's been a lot of discussion about this. So this is just, and I know the chat from Scuban and I, we talked about this already. Or also the question is, how big is the impact really on your organic rankings? So I personally, I believe there is an impact on organic rankings. So yes, it does make sense. The problem with that strategy is that if you will, in any given category, you will always have this one seller that's currently starting out and that will just outbid the entire market. And this is driving up the bids to, this is you're shooting them through the roof. And so the problem is that eventually, sellers would just continuously bid more and more and more and more, just following this logic of improving the organic rankings. And eventually it will just be too expensive to run any profitable campaigns for anyone. So yes, I think that profitability should not be the key priority for beginners, because it is important to show Amazon how your product is performing, so Amazon can gather some data. But I think you should still have a certain threshold that you're aiming for, and not go spend whatever it takes just to rank on the first page.
Yeah. So we got another one. Sellers are trying to manage launch phrases, organic ranking, profitability, etc. What is the best way to stay on the same page as a PPC manager who just sees ACOS? I feel like you should see more than ACOS. Like you should be looking at a lot more than just your ACOS if you're a PPC manager.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not exactly sure if I understood the question correctly. So maybe you can take it.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's try this one. Sellers are trying to manage launch phrases, organic ranking, profitability, etc. What is the best way to stay on the same page as a PPC manager who just sees ACOS? If you're a PPC manager, you really should know the other things that it gets involved with. So your listings and your organic sales, like there is a huge correlation between organic and PPC. Sometimes someone may click and come back later and purchase. Like there's a lot that you still need to take into account. So I think the real answer here is that you really shouldn't just be looking at just ACOS. You should be looking at a lot of other things and looking into what's actually working, and that could be correlated to PPC.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's see what else we got. For using automated PPC with Selix, can we still make manual tweaks to the campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, so the way it works in Selix, you can create a certain set of rules, right? Like I just showed before, and then you can activate this set of rules for a specific ad group. So those rules will be running. However, you always have the opportunity to interfere manually and to just change bids, add keywords, pause keywords, whatever you want to do. Whenever you do this, we will start counting from zero again. So let's say that you say, I don't know, increase bids after 20 clicks. So if you increase the bids manually already after 10 clicks, then we set the counter back to zero and start counting up to those 20 clicks again from the moment that you make a manual change.
Okay. All right. So let's knock out one more here. We're gonna take Sinovat Solutions because he's getting a little cranky. So he wants to know long tail keywords, broad or exact.
From a theoretical perspective, exact. From a practical perspective, broad. So theoretically, I think in an ideal world, you will only use exact. But the truth is that on long tail keywords, you don't have enough traffic. If you don't have enough traffic, so not enough clicks, you will essentially never be able to really make a decision whether it is actually a good or a bad keyword. So in order to just, aggregate a certain number of clicks that puts you in a position where you can really make a decision whether this is a good or a bad keyword, I would go with broad for long tail keywords.
There we go. All right. So we're well over an hour here, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I am available social. It's right there. You can email me. I will try to answer as many other questions as we can. If Franz, you want to give out your information, we can obviously not going to give it out for you, but we can. FJ@Selix.com. Feel free to send me an email, FJ@Selix.com, or, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Yeah. And big thank you for everyone for joining us. Obviously, we appreciate it. I'll be sending out the slides as well as the replay will hopefully be up in the next couple of days, or if not later today. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck out there. PPC is kind of a pain, but you'll figure it out and you'll get it if you're struggling. You're struggling with it.
Stay strong.
Stay strong. You got this. You got this. Franz, man, I really appreciate you joining us. This was awesome. This was a good one. I felt like we got a pretty good amount of information out. If we didn't answer your question, I apologize. Feel free to message us. But hope you all have a great day. Franz, appreciate it.
Thank you. Sorry again for being late. This is very, being German. It's really, it's a bad day for me. Being late to a meeting is really unacceptable as a German. So I apologize, and I hope people got value out of it, despite my delay.
No worries, buddy. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Good luck.
See you guys. Bye bye.